Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz says he has ordered strikes on Tehran after Iran fired missiles in violation of a US-brokered ceasefire, with the Israeli military working to intercept incoming missiles, according to reports. The UN Rights Office urges Israeli military to stop firing on Gazans seeking food after 21 were killed and around 150 wounded by bullets and tank shells near a central aid site, according to Gaza civil defense spokesman via AFP. Ukrainian drone hits apartment building near Moscow, injuring 2, while Russian strike kills 3 in Sumy, according to TASS and Ukrainian officials. Meanwhile, Starmer and Zelensky have announced military production deal in London. Iran's nuclear chief Mohammad Eslami said Tehran is working to restore its nuclear industry after damage from the recent US and Israeli strikes, with arrangements in place to avoid interruptions in production and services, according to local media. Maryam Rajavi, leader of the MEK and Paris-based National Council of Resistance of Iran, urged Iranians to bring down Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's regime, calling it a step towards democracy following the Israel-Iran ceasefire, according to reports. The Netherlands will send $202 million in new military aid to Ukraine, including 100 drone detection radars and 20 medical evacuation vehicles, Dutch Defense Minister Ruben Brekelmans announced today. This comes ahead of the NATO summit. Nissan faces tough questions about job cuts and plant closures at shareholder meet, while Japan's Prime Minister skips NATO summit amid US-Iran war. FX diplomat Nimura reappointed amid ongoing US trade talks, according to media reports. Australia's Safety Commissioner is urging the government to reject a proposed exemption for YouTube from a world's first social media ban for under 16-year-olds, set to begin incoming December 10th, according to media reports. Leaders of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which includes several European countries, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada, have gathered in Hague today. A yearly summit amid Russia's continued war on Ukraine and uncertainty about Washington's future in the alliance. The NATO summit that will last for 2 days is the first to be attended by US President Donald Trump since he took office in January for his second term. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, the former Dutch Prime Minister, will also chair the meeting for the first time. Among expected talking points are the war in Ukraine and the issue of how much member states are spending on their collective defense, a contentious point in particular for the US. Trump has long argued that the US shoulders too much of the financial burden and wants others to raise their defense spending. Trump has long argued that the US shoulders too much of the financial burden and wants others to raise their defense spending. However, in a major development, both Iran and Israel have confirmed the ceasefire. Apart from the focus on Israel-Iran, the NATO summit will also focus on the support for Ukraine defense spending, which NATO chief has pledged, going to be increased by 5%, and EU's leadership of NATO is likely to be discussed. Now we have guests joining us for this discussion. Oliver Bradley, he's an advisor and coordinator at EU-Israel Press Association. Thank you, Oliver, for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. According to you, how significant or does this NATO summit has any impact or any influence in this situation now? And also a lot of not a lot, but Japan also denying to join this NATO summit regardless of the invitation.
Well, I believe personally, good afternoon or good morning, and thank you for the invitation. Well, first of all, I'm always hopeful that these summits could bring something beyond just the meetings and coffee and cake and handshakes. I think what we see is the necessity for the NATO allies, Europe in general, also the United States in particular, and of course Japan in this sense, is deterrence. What are we facing today in the world is how credible are our statements as far as deterrence goes. And this goes into the Ukraine war. What are we doing? Are we trying to find an end to the Ukraine war? Would the Ukraine war, would a negative result, would a failure of Ukraine having a victory give other countries, and I would say China as an example, would it expand their, let's say, courage perhaps to take on some of the threats that they have done, for example, to Taiwan, and anything that happens in the China Sea would of course also influence Japan, Korea. So let's hope that there's unity in the NATO discussions, but right now it's too early to tell. I mean, I'm not sitting there, so I can't tell you exactly what they're talking about at this moment, but we do assume deterrence plus anti-terrorism, counter-terrorism in all of its facets and all of its forms. Missile deterrence, what does it mean?
Oliver, you will stay with us as we take the live visuals from the NATO summit.
Values and rights and the law, what is very important. The second point, I'm really thankful to the biggest three countries in Europe who helped us from the very beginning of this aggression, Russian aggression. It's Netherlands, Germany, and UK. I'm very thankful to Netherlands for such support, for a big budget for this year, and I know that your thoughts about next year and increasing support. Thank you very much. And of course, I want to talk with you on what to focus, what is the most important for us. Co-production of drones. Now we see this is the priority for the world. Everybody value now that the level of technologies in Ukraine during the war increased very much, and we have these technologies and we want to share them with our partners, with Hague. We began to work with some countries on co-production, and I'll be happy to work with Netherlands, and our production can work in Ukraine and here, and I think it will be a good step toward. And also, toward that, the new technologies and to save Europe at the end, because we see Russia worked with these drones with North Korea and with Iran. That's why we need to do our steps, our security steps. And of course, I want to thank for this military package which you announced already. I know the details. Thank you so much. It will be very, very helpful for us on the battlefield and also for our internal production. And the last point, of course, this is fight. We stand and survive, and we fight for freedom and for our values and for our future. Thank you for your, of course, condolences. This is very high price of this war, high price which Ukraine spent, and it's people's lives. And we see our future in a peace, and we need peace very much. And we in a peace Ukraine, and in Ukraine without war, and of course a part of a big family of EU family. And I want to speak with you. Also, we need some more urgent steps according to the clusters in EU, and this is very important to open these clusters, and we need support, and I want to speak with you about it also. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave.
Yes. Thank you. No, yes.
Now we go back to our discussion with Oliver Bradley. He's an advisor and coordinator. At EU-Israel Press Association. Now we go back to our discussion with Oliver Bradley. Oliver, thank you for staying with us. Now that we've seen, it's suggested that NATO will continue its support towards Ukraine. Does international law allow NATO to provide military aid to Ukraine without making it a formal member? And where is the line here? How much are they allowed, or is it okay for them to keep funding Ukraine?
Well, I'm not an international law expert, and I think there's so many misconceptions about international law completely and utterly. So I think that one should be very, very careful even who one invites to talk about international law. But from what I heard now on the transmission that you had just had us listen to, what I see is it doesn't really matter what NATO does, because it really depends what Russia's intention would be. Russia has been weakened, in particular because of Iran's having been weakened, and clearly there is a buildup in Ukraine's own capacity and capability to manufacture and produce its own defense systems at the moment. However, we have, just like with Iran and the United States, Iran and Russia, Iran did not use its full potential in its missile attacks against Israel, at least those that have been threatened. And we definitely know that Russia has a missile capacity that is much stronger and could be much more devastating than what they have used against Ukraine. And I believe what Russia is doing is that they're just kind of having a war of attrition. And it doesn't really matter what the Ukrainians, this is from my personal understanding, what they produce. If the Ukrainians do not have an equal type of missile defense system that the Russians have, the war of attrition would be what could weaken Ukraine eventually. Maybe Russia as well. You never know. People do get tired on all sides. Even aggressors get tired. But I don't know if that's enough. I think NATO has a lot of lip service. I find it personally quite insulting that in every European capital you have the Ukrainian flag flying everywhere, but there's no real involvement, and there's no real guts taken by the Europeans in particular to end the war, to find a way to end the war. We're still buying gas from the Russians in quantities that we are financing the Russians to combat the war in Ukraine. So it's I don't know what to call it, but it's quite absurd.
Right. And Oliver, now moving to a bigger picture here with the Iran-Israel ceasefire confirmed, is there any legal ground for NATO to intervene or monitor peace in regions beyond the North Atlantic scope?
I mean, in theory, no, but we did see that NATO also was involved in Afghanistan. I mean, there are mechanisms in every alliance that allows alliances to work in different ways, but I don't think NATO will be very much involved in what happens in Israel. I would greet it if they could be, but in the past it hasn't shown any effectiveness. Not even United Nations peacekeeping has shown effectiveness. I mean, everything we have now is because the international community is too weak to be a deterrent, I think, a longstanding deterrent. That's how I'm viewing this. Whether or not it's a good thing to have a ceasefire, you have two sides of the coin. On the one side, everybody says, let's just stop the bombings and let's get on with our lives. But unless the tail of the dragon has been cut off, and that has not yet been done with Iran, I think any ceasefire now will only see something, again, devastating happening in the midterm future. Maybe no longer in the near future, but the midterm future. So we'll just see what happens. We still have to determine and assess what success the American bombings have actually had. Where's the enriched uranium? Is it underground still, under rubble, or was it really removed? We don't know. We're still sitting there with question marks.
And also knowing that even though you've shown pessimism towards NATO right now, and in this global situation today, does international treaty law require NATO members to meet the 2% GDP defense spending target, or is it just a pressure from Trump and his administration and maybe a political non-binding goal?
I'm not an expert on NATO. However, I have a lot of experience with members of the Bundeswehr in Germany, and most agree that spending has to increase dramatically, and that the reliance on the United States needs to, let's say, be lessened a bit. There's too much reliance on any one member, and we've seen, I mean, what do alliances mean? Poland is an example, 1939. What did the alliances mean for Poland? They had 6 years of tragedy, despite an alliance, despite wars, quiet wars. I mean, so years before Western Europe actually started to combat Nazi Germany. I don't think we can answer these questions. It's just speculation, anything that we consider right now. But again, I'm not a NATO expert, but I do know that the Bundeswehr in particular, members, officers do believe that there needs to be increased spending, whatever the mechanisms are for that. But it does, I believe it rests on the national countries to actually go through with it. Trump can force anybody. I mean, every American administration has said that, and nothing had been done for many, many years. We're seeing movement right now. The German budget has taken on a debt, an incredible debt right now to help build up the German military, which is particularly morose and needs to be updated.
Thank you very much, Oliver Bradley, for joining us today in NewsX World for this discussion. Now we move on to our next story. Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz has ordered military strikes on Tehran, accusing Iran of violating a ceasefire announced earlier by US President Donald Trump. Katz says he instructed the army to intensify operations against regime targets and terror infrastructure in Tehran, calling Iran's actions a blatant violation of the truce. Iran, however, denied firing any missiles. State-affiliated Noor News quoted Iran's armed forces as saying no missiles had been launched towards Israel in recent hours. Just hours before the escalation, US President had declared the ceasefire now in effect on Truth Social, urging both sides to honor it. Israel and Iran had publicly confirmed the agreement. But today's rapid turn of events now casts serious doubts over the fragile truce after 12 days of conflict. Tensions from the Israel-Iran conflict are rippling across the region, prompting strong condemnations and urgent calls for restraint from neighboring states and global powers. Saudi Arabia strongly condemns Iran's attack on Qatar, calling it a violation of international law and an unjustifiable act of aggression. UAE denounces Iran's strikes on Al Udeid Air Base, calling it a breach of Qatar's sovereignty and a threat to regional security. Oman blames the escalation on Israel's yesterday's June 13th strike on Iran and calls for restraint. Saudi Arabia welcomes President Trump's ceasefire announcement and supports de-escalation efforts. Global concern grows over US-Israel strikes on Iran, which have destabilized the region. IAEA welcomes ceasefire-related developments in Iran and the situation. Now we have guests joining us for this discussion. He's Professor Ephraim Inbar, Senior Researcher at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, live from Jerusalem. Thank you, Professor, for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, what is your take on just the news just now that Israel claims that there were attacks fired towards Israel from Iran, and then Iran claiming that it hasn't fired any missiles towards Israel?
I think that Iran has a long history of not telling the truth. And its last statement about not shooting, launching missile to us is another example of this dire record. Israel will not turn the other cheek. If we are attacked, we'll respond. That's simple. And we have plenty of targets yet left in Iran. Just to remind you, the oil infrastructure is very combustible. And there are other targets in Iran that we can take, particularly since Israel has acquired air superiority over the skies of Iran. And I would suggest to the Iranian leaders to use more caution when challenging again Iran, although I'm fully aware that they have not given up their genocidal intentions against the Jewish state.
And now with Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Oman openly criticizing Israel, risking diplomatic isolation in the Arab world despite recent normalization efforts. Do you see any friends for Israel in the region, in the Middle East?
Yeah, I think that we are a strong state. Most Arab countries want good relations because we have something to give to them, to sell to them. This is the nature of international relations, and I want to remind you and the audience that since the brutal attack of Hamas on October 7, 2023, no country, no Arab country has severed its diplomatic relations with Israel, and quietly they're supporting the goals of the Israeli war against Hamas, as well as the war against Iran. Nobody in the region wants a nuclear Iran.
And building on your answer, what do you think was Iran's strategic intent in targeting Al Udeid Air Base last night in Qatar? Was it symbolic, retaliatory, or meant to internationalize this conflict?
I don't think so. I think that this was an interesting show of creative diplomacy on part of Iran. They coordinated the attacks with Qatar in order to make sure that no American is injured, and they let Americans know about this arrangement. So it's quite clear that the Iranian quasi-attack on Qatar will not bring a larger conflagration in the region.
And has this military escalation undermined Israel's broader efforts at regional integration post-Abraham Accords, according to you?
I think just the opposite. After our deterrence has been greatly eroded on October 7, we have regained deterrence by beating Iranian proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah. We neutralized the air defense of Iran and hit strongly their nuclear infrastructure. We decapitated the nuclear scientific base, or the heads of the base. And I think this feats only are well respected in the world. As the German Chancellor said, Israel is doing the dirty work for us.
And Professor, what is, in your view, are Israel's red lines going forward now, and can a path to restraint be realistically chartered?
Which charter?
The ceasefire or peace, can restraint on both sides be realistically chartered or happen?
I think that Israel agreed to a ceasefire. After a while, we achieved most of our goals in Iran, particularly the destruction of the nuclear infrastructure with the help of the United States, of course. And we are not interested in prolonging the war. We don't want a war of attrition. And we are ready to sit quiet unless provoked by Iran.
Thank you very much, Professor Ephraim Inbar, for joining us today and bringing your expertise to our conversation. Now we move on to our next story. A fierce war of words has erupted between U.S. President Donald Trump and Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell on Tuesday. Trump took to Truth Social, calling Powell a major loser and reiterating his demand for the Fed to cut interest rates. Trump argues that the economy is strong with no inflation, but claims that rate cuts would save the U.S. billions and boost economic growth. Powell, whom Trump appointed in 2018, has become a frequent target of Trump's frustration. The president believes Powell's reluctance to lower rates is hindering his economic agenda. Their strained relationship has been a growing issue, with Trump's economic approach often at odds with Powell's more cautious and centrist stance. Powell's independence is a core aspect of his role, and Trump has not been shy about criticizing that autonomy. Despite their differences, Powell's term as Fed chair runs until 2026, but Trump has hinted at firing him. The public feud has already shaken financial markets, with Trump's economic policies creating uncertainty. The clash between the two continues to have global economic implications. Now, for this discussion, we have guest joining us, Jim Rice. He's a professor of international law from Vigan, Philippines. Thank you for joining us today. Good to see you. How serious is the threat to the Federal Reserve's independence, and when a sitting president like Trump publicly insults the Fed chair and demands rate cuts, knowing that he himself appointed him?
Well, thanks very much, Asuma, for pointing that out. I mean, it's particularly ironic, I think, to everyone that it was Trump himself who appointed Jerome Powell, and during the Biden administration, Powell continued to serve as the Fed chairman. First of all, Trump lacks all legal authority to fire Chairman Powell, and so that's a non-starter. However, Trump has been determined to rule as a dictator from day one. He's basically assuming all powers to himself. And this would be very dangerous if he were to fire Powell, and indeed it would be illegal.
And now that Trump claims the economy is strong and inflation is under control, does that align with current macroeconomic data, according to you?
Now, again, I'm a person who's knowledgeable in international law, and I'm not a kind of a macroeconomic expert, but I would say that the facts on the ground would indicate otherwise. Trump's disastrous tariff policies have and will only contribute to inflation. Trump is, furthermore, what is necessary in markets, any markets at all, whether local or national or international, is certainty. That's what we were constantly taught in law school, and that's what I know to be a fact. And what Trump has done is to obliterate the concept of certainty, and he's introduced doubt and fear into the markets. And so my view is that Trump is taking America down a very dark path, and his absurdity, his vanity, will result in catastrophe if this is allowed to occur. To make matters worse, though, Trump doesn't even have knowledgeable and courageous advisors around him. He's decided to appoint nothing but craven yes men who will only agree to Trump's agenda.
You've kind of already touched down on that, but how harmful is it when monetary policy becomes a tool in a political messaging, especially in an election year if this power struggle continues? What could be the lasting consequences?
It's fatal. I mean, it's fatal. What Trump is doing is he's taking America down the same road that you have in Putin's Russia, Xi Jinping's China, or Kim Jong-un's North Korea. The United States is supposed to be a country that is governed by the rule of law. Trump has been degrading that since his first term. And in his second term, he's become much more virulent and dangerous in terms of his destruction of the rule of law. To make matters worse, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives and Senate have a lack of spine, have a lack of courage, and they won't stand up to Trump. So if he continues down this path, it's a recipe for economic catastrophe.
And by economic catastrophe, do you mean that could this continued Trump-Powell tensions weaken international confidence in the US dollar or federal leadership?
Absolutely right. I noticed when Trump started imposing his wildly contradictory and ridiculous tariffs at the beginning of his term, he began to pull back when he noticed that the treasuries, the federal bond market was tanking. And I think that this is the thing that Trump fears the most. But quite frankly, I don't think that Trump is fully rational. I believe he's deranged. I'm sorry to say this as an American, but I don't believe that he's a fully rational actor in this regard. And again, he's surrounded by nobody but sycophants.
Right. Thank you very much, Professor Jim Rice, for joining us and sharing your insight on the situation. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.